Hey, it's Paul Banis of GreatDad.com, and I'm here with my weekly series talking to dads about all things fatherhood. And like lucky again today to have a younger dad for a perspective on modern fatherhood, since my experience now is great experience, but it's a little old. So I've got EksAyn Anderson with me today, who's also a fellow podcaster and dad thinker. Welcome.
Thanks, Paul. Thanks for having me on the show. What an honor to be on your show.
Well, thank you. Thank you. I'm interested in a lot of your perspectives. You do some sales coaching and some work in sales, but you really have this passion of working with fathers, and we're going to get into some of the questions that we talked about before. But I guess the first question is, why mix your other profession with this? What's important about the message about fatherhood that you
Oh, I think dads are so needed right now. I think dads, if you look at the problems in society, there was a wise man who said something like this. He said, if we don't fix marriages and families, everything else we do will be like straightening deck chairs on the Titanic. And when I heard that quote, and I probably misquoted it, it really rang true with me that, the problems that we see in the world, the crime or the rioting or kind of things like this. I've talked to a number of policemen and they said, you'd be surprised that almost every person they're putting in jail had a dad who was not present. And that doesn't mean if you have a dad that's not present that you're going to go to jail. That's not what it means at all. But a lot of times having a dad there helps kids learn things at a time that's crucial so they don't have to learn it really hard later, the hard way later on. And I just think it's really timely that we need good dads to step up right now. There's
yeah
so many good dads, but we do need to step up.
Yeah, well, I totally agree. I mean, as a very much of a San Francisco progressive, I'm all for freedom of choice of all kinds of manners, but I think we have lost a lot of the value orientation of what a good family is, and the solidity and the security that provides to kids. And at least in my mind, there's no argument against that, that nuclear family structure, and as well as the fact that it takes a village of people to really raise kids. And I think that's sadly lacking in a lot of communities, a lot of couples where there's not two parents, and then there's also not that old-fashioned kind of village concept where people would fit in. I know in my case, growing up with a single mom, I was lucky to have men in our social circle, in our community, who's kind of took that role. But now that's hard to find.
I agree.
Yeah. So you've got five kids, all ranging from six to 20.
That's right.
How is that colored, I guess, your view of fatherhood? Because being an involved father with five is a lot harder than being an involved father with one or two.
Well, I heard somebody say that it's almost easier when you have more children because they like to play together and they kind of help each other and they become friends. I've just enjoyed the journey. I just love each one of and I really feel like, as a dad, as a parent, I have a career and that's an important part of my life. But sometimes people make that the most important thing. So I have my career and then my family kind of fits somewhere around the background somewhere.
Right.
And I've tried to think of it differently that, me being a dad is the most important thing. And I have a career that supports the most important thing, which is me being a dad and a husband for my family. That's how I've tried to structure it.
Yeah.
And hopefully I do a good job. Sometimes I don't.
Sorry.
I said, sometimes I get that part right and sometimes I don't, but I'm trying to keep that the main thing.
Yeah, I think it's obviously it's really hard to do. I mean, one part is the actual decision making, like I'm going to go to work today, even though I don't really have to, but I'm driven by that rather than going to the park with the kids. And that's a conscious decision. But quite often, primary caregivers and primary breadwinners are forced into situations where they don't really have that choice. So what advice do you give to people who are, maybe they have to work 60 hours a week and they have limited time with their family, but they are, forced to work extra hours just to put food on the table?
This is a great question, Paul, and thanks for asking. So the truth is, I don't know what the best thing is in every individual situation. I'm sure there's different individual situations that I could say something about that wouldn't apply to one person, that would apply to another. But that being said, it was interesting. I had the opportunity to talk to somebody, and she said that her father had taken her to work someday, or no, it was her grandfather. He was quite wealthy, and he ended up taking her to meetings, taking her to work, and she felt like that was one of the best things that happened to her. Now, we all have to work hard. We have to work in this, in the society we live in, we've got to hustle to make things happen to be able to provide most of the time. And I would just say, do your best to try to still make being with your kids a priority, right? I mean, if you really can, like when you come home from work, if you have your phone, you have an option to leave it in another room or maybe turn it off. Maybe you don't have to continue working all through the night because people need email. If you can set boundaries and really be present when you're there, be present, right? If you can involve your kids occasionally in your work or sometimes and have a bring to work day so they can feel like they're involved. That may not work for every profession or every person or every situation, but for those, it might work for some. And then just, I think really being present when we get in, some of the things I have to kind of shift gears when I'm coming back from a work situation, coming home, take just a moment and think about the kind of dad I want to be, how I want things, and really try to get back into dad mode. So I come in and I can give my kids a hug and tell them that I love them and be present, play a game of chess or talk to them or read a book together, or whatever it is we're going to do, and try to put my phone or my device or anything that could be distracting and be present. So you got to do both. You got to work, but you can probably find a way to make the time you have available with your kids available. Here's the next thing. I'll just say this one point, and if you have a choice, because sometimes we have more choice than we think. If you have a choice between a career where you have to leave on Sunday and you're gone for 6 days at a time, or a career that might pay a little less but allows you to be a little more present, where you could come home each evening or be present a little bit each day, maybe you take the career that's not as lucrative but allows you to be present.
Yeah,
right?
I don't think a lot of people are thinking that way, but I've had several guests talk about the fact that we do have a lot of choice in our life. The new car versus the old car, the newest TV versus the, struggling on with, 720p or whatever. And a lot of us don't think of that way. And it's hard, especially as a younger dad at 25 or 30, when you've got kids, to be thinking of looking back, what it'll be like at 60, thinking like, I wish I'd spent more time, or I'm glad we have that house in Hawaii, but I don't really know my son, or, all these trade-offs that seem more obvious at my stage of life than they did maybe even when the kids were little. And how far be it for me to try to judge the decisions that we make. But I think your point is more, take a hard look at the trade-offs that you're making, because some of them, maybe they seem abstract. Maybe it seems like I've got that good job so I can get the new car, but it's really like, I've got that really intensive job that gets me the new car, but it steals away from the thing that I thought was the highest thing on my list.
Yeah, exactly. And two thoughts came to mind when you were talking. Thanks, Paul. There was Stephen Covey. He wrote a book called The 7 Habits a few decades ago, maybe. And he said, a lot of people climb this ladder to success and they get to the top and then they realize that the ladder was leaning against the wrong wall. So I got to the top and I made a ton of money. And then I realized that my kids don't know me and I'm estranged from my family and I have real problems because my ladder was on the wrong wall. And the next thought that came to mind is, I've asked people this question. I've said, do you know what your great grandparents did for a living? Now, remember, you had 16 of them and most people can't tell me. Now, some people do know one or two, or, they say, well, I had a great grandfather and this is what he did, or great grandfather. But here's the thing. Do you care if they had the coolest horse or the coolest plow or their fence was nicer than the neighbors? Do you really care? And I hate to say it, but your great grandchildren are going to care about as much if you had a nice car today as you did. Now, let me take it from another perspective here. I'll give you an obvious one, but so I live in the United States of America. The reason I live here is because more than one of my ancestors, some hundreds of years ago, came to the United States of America. Well, that affects my economic opportunities, my educational opportunities, my cultural, religion. I mean, the language I speak, everything is affected by something my parents did. Now, my great parents, right? So, and I don't know how many greats, and I may have maybe I missed the year or something right there. But the point is, they're still affecting me today. Those choices they made are affecting me. They're affecting my children. They're affecting my grandchildren. Now, that's an obvious one because it's geographical. You can see somebody got on a boat and came to America, and that affects me now. But just as profound, but not as obvious, but just as profound is, were they kind? Were they checked in? Were they drunk? Were they angry? Those kinds of things can be passed down as well for generations. Now, here, flip side on business. I mean, most businesses these days, in fact, they're getting shorter. The lifespan of a business is actually getting shorter, you'll see. And so, even most businesses don't make it past the first year or two, but even really long-standing businesses, most of them aren't going to make it till past their 18th birthday. So if you and I, Paul, started an amazing business and it was rocking, chances are in a decade or two, it would fizzle out. But what you and I do as parents, that can go down for hundreds and hundreds of years. So if you really want to make a difference, maybe spending all your time at business, it might be awesome for a decade or two, but the long lasting, profound stuff can last for a long time, centuries. I mean, I think it can go on for forever, but I'm saying the choices my great parents are still affecting me today. My great grandfather, great grandmother, things they did are affecting me today. It's in ways I don't even understand, but I can try to understand.
You think that's why I hear a lot when I talk to dads, and I do a course called The Intentional Father, which is about kind of thinking through this and getting ahead of it. We're going to talk about values versus principles in a minute, but a value that always comes through for men almost immediately is legacy. And I don't know if that's true for women. I don't work with women that same way, but I think that talks to what that value is what you're talking about. Is like you're leaving behind not just your time on earth with them, but then how they are as people and how that affects the next generation. And then I guess then there's this question like, does it matter? You're going to be dead anyway. But that seems to be an important value that drives a lot of men.
Well, I think, as I've heard it said that as we get older, we tend to think more about what legacy am I leaving? You're right. We're going to live on this, planet for maybe 70, maybe 80, maybe 100 years if we're lucky. What legacy are we leaving? And I really do think that the difference that we make in the long-term difference, if you look at the actual difference from a long-term perspective, I don't think anything you do in business is going to last as long as what you do as a parent. That's my view. I really don't. I think if you really look at the long-term difference, you can have a business that's a rock star business, and in a decade, it could be bought, sold, bankrupted, disrupted, let me give you an example. There are people who were in the typewriter repair business back in the 60s and 70s. They may have been really good and dominated the field. Now that field doesn't even exist. Some of the stuff we're doing today may be disrupted by technology. It may be just not even relevant in a few decades. And just like typewriter repair people, did a great service back when we had typewriters. Nobody uses them anymore. And so that business has been disrupted. Even if you dominated and were the best typewriter repair person, this is no longer relevant, but the kind of parent you would still be relevant centuries later. I mean, it's affecting me. The choices that my ancestors, are still affecting me profoundly today.
Right. I think it's the question mark is though, as we hear about the people who are super famous and the trade-offs they made were like not being good fathers, but then they are, their legacy carries on. Like I'm thinking like maybe somebody like Elon Musk, who apparently is just a horrible person when it comes to his fatherhood, but he'll be remembered for forever. And maybe we benchmark ourselves against those type of people who create these like super legacies where their, children's children will think back, oh, I was part of that. But I think what your point is too is like not most of us aren't trading off our immediate legacy for some sky high presence in the world where we changed the world in some way that was far more important than what we did just with our kids.
I think you said it perfectly as far as, yeah.
Well, I know there's a famous photographer, Sebastian Salgado. He travels all over the world. He documents these incredible ecological scenes, both beautiful and polluted. And his children think he's an incredible photographer, but he didn't spend any time with them. And there's a mixed feeling about his legacy, like to have a really famous, successful person as your father who you don't even know is less than ideal, I guess, for the child.
Right. In the grand, large, long perspective picture, I would say there may be some exceptions, but in almost every case that I can think of, the most profound work happens out of sight of society, out of view. Even if you look back in history, this is the interesting thing, all the great people who are historical great, none of them, I mean, the pyramids are, they'll be dust one day. What kind of legacy do you leave? Right.
Yeah.
So
maybe we're touching on something that goes even far deeper. That is the day-to-day, the day-to-day work of being a good human being and doing the right thing, being a good dad, being a present dad, asking the right questions, being generous with your partner and all those other things, they kind of go, maybe a lot is unnoticed and it's not heroic, except in some really purely existential, this is the core meaning of existence is what we're talking about, being a good human being, being a good parent. And that's got to be reward in and of itself.
I think so. I think just there are hidden rewards to being a parent that are never going to be seen by the public, but are deeply rewarding to those who are involved. And I think honestly, if you could see the real history of the world, like the real history, I think it's possible that what happened in kitchens and in cradles, like where, might actually be more of outcomes than what happened on battlefields and with military armistices and all kinds of things, like the stuff that happened. Because when you look at the real root of what's going on, in fact, and back to kind of what we talked about at the beginning, when you see major problems happening in the world, a lot of people want to hack at the leaves. They say, oh, we need more of this or we need more of that. We need more social programs or less social programs. We need more of this politician or that politician. We need more of this or that. Not to say those things can't do some really good in the world. That they're good. But to me, if you trace it back to the root, we're not hacking at the leaves, we're talking the root. The problem happened a lot of times a decade or two ago. I saw something on the news recently where I think a guy jumped over and tackled a judge. Okay. I don't want to get to. Now, there was like 5 bailiffs who had to pull this guy off.
All right.
The guy probably is going to go to jail, have enhanced charges. Probably there's going to be court fees and attorney's fees and jail time. And it's going to cost society hundreds of thousands of dollars to try to rehabilitate this gentleman who decided to jump over and tackle a judge. I mean, that's what it's going to cost, a lot of money and a lot of time and a lot of resources. And somebody once said, if we don't have enough good parents, there will not be enough prisons. There won't be enough policemen. That problem isn't something that the policeman should have to solve. That problem could have happened a decade or two ago when a dad could have stepped up and said, you know what, son, let's talk about how we respect people. Let's talk about how we treat people like we want to be treated. Let's talk about why we treat people well. Let's talk about being honest or kind to others. And if that same person learned when they were 6 and 10 and 12 and 15 that, hey, my dad expects me to be kind, to treat people like I want to be treated, to do this, there's a very low probability this guy would be jumping over and tackling a judge. Well, where's the real problem? Do we need more social spending on this guy, or should we help parents that a decade or two before might have been able to solve the problem? And I think there's this quote that says, for every 1,000 hacking at the leaves, there's 1 hacking at the root. We need to hack at the root. And the root is we need good dads like you, like Paul, to step up and say, hey, this is how we're going to be. And it doesn't mean you have to be a perfect dad. And as dads, we all make mistakes. We all blow it sometimes. But if we keep trying to be better, I think we can make a way bigger difference than we think. And I think that's what the world needs right now. It's one of the reasons I'm passionate about it right now.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I think we have a role, both that communication part, being verbal about what we expect and what our values are, but also modeling what those values are to our kids. I don't know in your experience, but having kids and knowing that they were watching me made me a better human being. I mean, it took me completely out of my head and into taking care of them, but also it made me like, we did a lot more volunteering. We were a lot more public service oriented. We were trying to, model generosity and things like that. And that's a wonderful thing if it drives you to also to be a better person. There's nothing wrong with that. That's
exactly right. The good news is they're watching everything you do. The bad news is that they're watching everything you do. So you got to make sure you're doing it right. Right. So yeah, you're exactly right.
Exactly. So I wanted to talk a little bit about your feeling about principles, that's important to align with principles. We talked a second before we started, and I didn't want to get too deep because I wanted to have this conversation about the difference between values and principles. So values like generosity or kindness or empathy or legacy versus what your definition of principles is and how they fit together.
Yeah, this is a super good question. Thanks, Paul. So let me tell you how I define it. Now, some people might define these words differently than I'm about to, but let me tell you how I define it and how I try to relate this idea. So we talk about gravity. Gravity is a scientific principle. It works where I'm at. It works where you're at. It works everywhere in the world. I mean, it keeps us here on the ground. It even works out in space. I mean, gravity is what keeps the moon going around the earth. It keeps the earth going around the sun. Millions of miles away, there are clusters of galaxies spinning around in a cluster held together by gravity. Gravity's everywhere that we know of. I mean, it's just there. Now, it's bigger than me. It's bigger than you. It's bigger than anyone. And so that principle of gravity, I'm going to call it a principle, is real whether you value it or not, whether you believe it is or not. Gravity is real. Now, so some people say, well, I have my principles and they work for me, and you have your principles and they work for you. Can you imagine someone saying, gravity might work for you, but it doesn't really work for me? I mean, that same person could go to the top of a cliff and say, I believe I can fly, and jump off. And guess what? Gravity's still there.
Right.
And even if they really believe it, even if they really value that they can fly without it. Now, there are principles that can interact with gravity. I mean, there's aerodynamic principles, if you brought a parachute or a hang glider or something. But the point is that when I come in contact with any principle that's really real, I have at least a couple choices. I can either align with it or I can ignore it to my peril. Now, I've asked people, I've said, how could you align with gravity to make you money? And I hear things like this. Well, you could start a skydiving company. You could literally get a plane and some insurance and a good pilot and have people and charge them $300 or $400 a jump. You could build a hydroelectric dam and make electricity. The gravity actually pulls the water through and makes electricity. You could start a ski resort, have people have this thrilling experience going down a hill. Bungee jumping business, roller coasters. I mean, there's all kinds. I had one person say plastic surgery, like defying gravity. But you can align with gravity, and gravity could actually make you wealthy. Or you could fall off a cliff and it could injure you and even kill you. So gravity's just there. It could either make me wealthy if I respect it and align with it, or gravity could injure me, maybe even kill me. And so what's the difference? Whether I aligned with it or ignored it. Now, I believe, Paul, that there are principles in human relations that are true and real, whether or not you value them.
No. Okay.
Okay. That, like, for example, let's talk about one: honesty. If I want people to trust me, even if I don't value honesty, let's say I value being dishonest and being tricky and sneaky, and I'm just going to manipulate you. Even if I value that, if I want to be trusted, I've got to be honest. And with my kids see me being honest, even where I might hurt me in the short run, I can build trust because people know that I'm honest. I believe if you align with honesty, it's like building a hydroelectric dam or a ski resort. And if you ignore honesty, it's like getting injured. Now, I don't think that principle is something that you can say, oh, well, because I don't value it, it's not real. I believe that being honest, if we're talking about principles that govern our consequence. Okay. If my kid sees that I'm honest, but then there's a few times where I'm going to just lie. They realize they know that dad will be honest most of the time, but he kind of will lie here. Well, if they see me being honest, even in situations where, and like you said, they're always watching, they realize, what, I can count on my dad. I can tell that he's just honest all the time. So that to me is a principle of human relations that's real, whether you believe it is or not. And yes, you can value a true principle. You can say, I really value honesty. That's one of the things I value. But in my view, the principle is deeper than just what you value. There really is stuff out there like gravity that's real, whether you believe it is or not. And you can't build trust and be dishonest in the long run because it just won't happen.
Right. I get what you're saying, the difference between, I don't think a lot of people go into it saying that I've got a value that's dishonesty, but they don't put honesty at the top of their list. They're willing to cut a lot of corners, tell a lot of kind of gray area lies throughout their day to their spouse, to their kids, whatever, and that it's not important to them. Whereas you're saying that the two are connected, unmistakably connected, trust and honesty. And
I'm saying, if you want trust long-term and you try to ignore that principle, eventually, especially with the people who are close to you, like your children or your spouse, your partner, it's going to come through and you're not going to be able to. Sometimes people think, well, I can be a liar and a cheat at work and I'll be honest at home and I'm going to keep them compartmentalized. And the truth is, the psychology says you can do it for a while, but you can't do it long-term. Eventually, you'll start becoming more honest or you'll start becoming more dishonest, but you're going to move. It's called cognitive dissonance. You're going to move one direction or the other.
So you talk about the fact that there are, I imagine honesty would be one of them. Are there other principles that are important to impart upon your kids or to impress upon
Sure,
them?
sure. I mean, like, for example, gosh, I could tell you some stories. I wish we had some time here. I could tell you a little story. Like, for example, let me tell you a real quick story. I was at a bank once, okay? And I'll tell you, many years ago, I had a problem with my account. My account was in the red. I did not put money in my account when I should have put money in my account. And I was in the red, okay? And I went to the bank and I said, I need to get this fixed. And there was a gentleman there who helped me fix the problem. He was really nice. He waived some of the fees. I put the money in like I should have, and I got my account back up into the black. Well, when he was done, I looked at him and I said, hey, can I get the email to your boss? And he looked at me kind of funny, like, why do you want the email to my boss? And I said, well, I'm going to tell him what a great job you did. Now, I went home that night and it took me only 2 minutes, but I typed up a letter that said something like this: Dear Mr. Branch Manager, I had the opportunity of working with Jeff. He was very professional and helpful. I think he deserves a raise and a promotion. Okay. And I sent it to his boss and I copied it to Jeff. Well, I didn't think anything else about it. He helped me, I helped him. And so it was interesting. Well, I went back to the same bank. Now, by the way, I live in a pretty big, fairly large city and a fairly big place at the time. And something happened that never happened to me before. When I got to the bank, somebody came up to me. That was not Jeff. It was not the branch manager. It was somebody else. They came up to me and said, Mr. Anderson, can I help you with your banking? And I said, I was a little surprised. I said, well, sure. And they said, follow me. They took me from the back of the line. They let me do my banking in front of everyone else. You would have thought I had $10 million at the bank, which we all know I didn't. It happened again and again. I got treated like an absolute king. And it didn't start happening until I had done this thing, the nice thing for Jeff. Now, here's the thing. I could have, in this situation, I really think that the principle, I call it the golden rule. People don't like that sometimes. Treat people like you want to be treated. Yeah. Karma, whatever you want to call it. Yeah. What we put out comes back. And if, I could have gone to the bank and said, I can't believe you charged me so many fees. I've had, I make one mistake and you charge me, you better fix this problem and you better fix it now. And I could have been a little bit of a bully, but what would have happened when I came back a week or two later? They would have said, watch out for that guy. He's a little bit of a time bomb. And by the way, make him wait a little longer because he's kind of a jerk. I could get a short-term result by ignoring that principle. But it's kind of like falling off a cliff, right? If you don't treat people the way you want to be treated, it's the same as ignoring gravity. You might fall off a cliff. If you treat people like you want to be treated, it comes back to you. Now, that's a principle that as a dad, I think it's important to teach my kids. I think it's important for my children to know, be the first to be nice, treat people like you want to be treated, and you'll have such a much better life than if you go through life trying to be a bully and trying to say, fix the problem. And if you don't, and there's a lot of people who think they can intimidate and they can ignore the golden rule. They can ignore this, treat people like we want to be treated. And for a while, they might get success. In the long run, their relationships are broken. Their businesses get broken. I've seen people in business who were rock stars for a year or two, but they were ignoring treating people like they should be treated, like they want to be treated. And they're gone now. Yeah. Long-term business, long-term parenting, you can't ignore that. It's like gravity. That's my view.
Yeah, I totally agree with that one. I mean, even more than the people who are really aggressive and everything, they make $1 million, but they have empty lives. The fact of the matter is just that if you are grateful, if you are generous, if you do respect the golden rule, your own health is better, your disposition is better. A lot of things come to you like a front of the line bank treatment, just magically, just because of this kind of, I don't know if it is karma or what it is in the world, but putting stuff out there that is positive comes back to you in ways that you don't expect. And I made that sound kind of California, but I can't help but believe it.
I think it's true. I think you're exactly right. I mean, and to me, it's true whether you believe it is or not. I think if you put things positive, it comes back. Now, I can value it. I can say I value treating people like I want to be treated. The nice thing is when you value things that are actually real. Like what I'm saying is, if I value honesty, I think honesty is a real principle that's bigger than you or me. And then when I align with it, that's great because I have the positive consequences. But if I value something that's not based on something that's like I said with gravity, if I really believe that I can fly and I jump to the top of the cliff, you see, this is the problem, Paul. We can do anything we want in life, anything, but we do not control the consequence of our choices. Principles do. Like principles, the reason I want my kids to learn principles is because they're what control the consequences. I can believe with all my heart that I can jump off a cliff and fly. And But once I jump, the principle of gravity was what controls my consequence. In my view, it becomes really important to say, what is really real? What's really real in human relations? I think honesty is one of them. I think treating people like you want to be treated is one of them. I think they're as real as gravity. And then make my little tiny daily decisions align with it instead of ignoring it. So, if I'm treating people right all the time, in the long run, I get great consequences. If I'm ignoring that principle and being a bully, in the long run, I get kind of bad consequences, right? And so hopefully I can value what's real and try to find out what those real things are. Like, what is gravity real? Well, I think it is. I hope it is. I'm not saying I have a handle on all truth, and what you value is important, but like, let's try to figure out what's really real and then make our little tiny decisions align with it and not ignore it.
Yeah, well, it's interesting. I now it makes me want to take the list I have of fatherhood values and see if I can attach each one of them to a principle, because a lot of them seem to stand alone just as good altruistic values, but maybe they all do have some relationship to real world consequences if you don't hold them, at least respect those values.
I would probably say yes. That's my view.
Yeah.
And I don't claim to have all truth, Paul. I'm sure I'm just saying that's my view.
Well, you got five kids, so that's a lot of experience in knowing what's worked for them. So finishing up here, I want to just get your opinion about the idea of resilience, because I'm doing a lot of more work with that right now in my coaching, and I'm really interested in how dads can be more resilient and model that. And maybe that is one of these values that's a principle. If you value resilience, and it turns into a principle, because resilient people are able to bounce back in the face of everyday challenges. They don't collapse. They don't take the negative road, or they find ways to find positive reactions to problems. What is your feeling about resilience?
Yeah, it's a super good question, Paul. And I heard someone say that the best defense is a good offense. And let me tell you what I mean. Instead of waiting till my kid has some really bad thing and then trying to help him out of it, one of the things we could be doing is trying to build confidence in our kids. And one of the ways, let me give you an example. My 5-year-old daughter came to me, and she knows that I like to hike this mountain. I live in the Rocky Mountain area. And in the Rocky Mountain area, there's this mountain that's about 11,700 feet tall, about a half hour from our house. Okay. And I like to hike this mountain. Oh. Well, she came to me and said, "Hey, Dad, I want to hike Timpanogos with you," which is the name of this mountain. She goes, "I want to hike this mountain." And she's 5 years old. Okay. It's a big mountain. Now, my initial reaction was, "Hey, you're too young. You can't do this." But luckily, in this one situation, now I've blown it plenty of times, but I'm going to tell you, one time I got it right. Okay. I said, "You really want to hike it?" She goes, "Dad, I really want to hike it. I really want to hike it." I said, "Well, it's an all-day hike. You got to start before the sun comes up, and you got to hike all day, and it might be coming back at night. You sure you want to do that?" And she goes, "Dad, I want to do it." I said, "Well, what happens if your feet start to hurt? Your feet are probably going to hurt if it's about 15 miles up and back." She goes, "Well, I'll rest. Then we keep going." I said, "Well, that sounds like a good plan." I said, "Are you sure you really want to do it?" She said, "Dad, I want to do it. I want to do it." I said, "You know what? I'll let you try. But I want you to know, we're going to see if we can go the whole way. And I'm going to tell you right now, I want your expectations to be your feet are going to hurt." So here's the thing. We start hiking this mountain, and we take rest. And she goes, "I got to tell you, Paul, she made it to the top of this mountain. She was 5 years old. There were adults at the top of this mountain. When my 5-year-old got to the top, they stood up and gave her a standing ovation and were high-fiving her for getting to the top of this mountain." Now, I could have just squashed her and said, "You know what? You're too young. I'll take you later." And in some situations, that might be the right thing to do. Okay. But in this situation, the fact that I did it, now I got to tell you, when she got back down, she was so confident. She's like, "I hiked to the top of that mountain. I hiked to the top of the mountain." And she had this, like, "I can do it" attitude.
Yeah.
Now that I can do it. Now, let me give you one other example. Same daughter. She was asked to give a presentation in front of a bunch of people. Okay. And she was only 8 years old at the time. And most people say, "You can't publicly speak." She got up there for 5 minutes. She talked, and she did a great job, and everybody felt good about it. And she felt really good about it too. And what I'm saying is, to build resilience, if we can let our kids have opportunities that maybe even we might stretch us. One last example. I had my kids come to me and they said, "Hey, Dad, we want to sleep outside in the backyard." And it was December. And it was 20 degrees outside where I live, 20, like 12 degrees below zero. And part of me is like, "No, you're going to freeze to death. Don't do it." But what I said to him, I said, "This is a good opportunity." I said, "If you really want to sleep in there, let's talk about it. You lose most of the heat out of your head. Can you wear a hat? Can we layer? Do we have some mummy bags?" And I walked through it with him, and it was fun. We actually threw some sleeping bags in the tent. We slept outside in December at 20 degrees, and we had a fabulous time. We watched a little movie in this tent. but they got, and we talked about the principles of staying warm, and it was a great teaching opportunity. Like, how do you stay warm when it's really cold, and how do we layer, and how do we do these things? And that built their confidence. So now when they do have something that really tries up, they're like, I can do hard things. And so the best defense is not to wait until they're sinking into a hole somewhere. The best defense is to take those little opportunities, help them build confidence. And then they already know that, hey, I can do hard things. And yeah, this is hard, but I'll figure out a way. And I think that's the way to build resilience in my view.
Yeah, no, I've heard that from other fathers. I think it's a challenge to find those opportunities. You were lucky you kind of got two of them thrust upon you. But I've heard other dads suggest like they're always looking for little tests that they know their child will have to stretch to, but will probably succeed at. And it's just like, it must be this like constant modulation, like, oh my God, is he ready for this? Or is she, is that too far for her to go today? But having that strategy in mind or consciousness, like I'm trying to build my child's confidence up while strengthening them is a really an incredible gift. It must take a lot of energy. I'm afraid I wasn't that good at finding those on my own, but
plenty of times I'll tell you that, but there's a few times I've gotten it right.
It's inspiring. You're lucky. They've also seemed like they've come up with those on their own, things that challenge you.
Well, and I heard one dad say, give him a $5 bill and have him go talk to the cash register and say, hey, can I get change? Can I change this to quarters or dollars or something? And that's a little bit of I have to stretch and I have to talk to a stranger. Well, you're sitting right there. And that allows them to be a little more confident interacting with people. Little things just where you can, where they can, I guess your job as a dad is to, in a reasonable and safe way, help them be a little bit uncomfortable because and not in a weird way. I'm saying like a little bit uncomfortable because that helps them grow, right? Yep. When I have to go talk to a stranger, but my dad's standing 10 feet away and get the change, or when I have to hike a mountain and my feet do hurt, but I realize it's a little uncomfortable, but I made it and I'm still okay. That, in my view, is it's like our job as a dad is to kind of help our kids grow, because helping them be uncomfortable in these good, reasonable ways is actually what helps them become strong. And we're trying to train our kids to eventually we're going to die. I mean, we want them to be confident, awesome people who can do it without us. Right. Yeah.
But it is a challenge because part of you too is you're trying to help them avoid pain and suffering because there's some embodiment of you and they're tiny and they're vulnerable, and trying to find those things that are going to be a little bit too pain, but aren't going to pain. They aren't going to hurt.
There's a balance.
Your heart.
Like I wouldn't send my kids out to sleep outside at 20-degree weather so they freeze it. Wouldn't want to do that. But if I could talk about the principles and we can talk about the sleeping bags and we can have this fun experience together and learn together, that's different than saying, okay, go out and sleep in the backyard and freeze it. I'm not going to do that. Right. So
you're alive. Right. Well, EksAyn, it's really been fun talking to you about a lot of these things. You really stretched my mind about the principles versus values things. I want to dig into that a little bit more. So people can find you, I guess the easiest one, and we'll put it in the show notes, is at EksAyn.com. That's EksAyn.com. And then you've got some other websites as well, but I guess you can get there from that.
That's right.
You do public speaking, you've got a podcast.
If you want some dad tips, you could go to EksAyn.com/subscribe, and you can get dad tips delivered to your email every week. And
that's a great thing too, to have a reminder about some of these things, because we get lost in the everyday world, and sometimes it is hard to focus. And I think maybe men more than women need some sort of reminder system periodically to keep us in the game when we're being dragged into that work world, which now is 24/7, 24 hours a day, email, texting, and all the rest. So good. So
Paul, you're a great host. You ask great questions. Such an honor to be on your show today. Thank you.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. If anybody is interested in talking more about fatherhood, resilience, some of my courses, just contact me at paul@GreatDad.com, or you can go to GreatDad.com/go and set up a free hour-long conversation. I'm always love to talk about fatherhood and challenges people are facing, and how you might find your own solutions to get through them. Okay. Until next time, Paul Banis, GreatDad.com. Thank you very much, EksAyn, for joining me today.
Thanks, Paul. Such an honor.